Welcome to the Organic MD podcast. This is podcast number 2, with a focus on cholesterol.
Hi, this is Dr. Damon Miller, and this is the Organic MD podcast. This is our second installment, and today we're going to be talking about cholesterol. Boy, there's a hot topic in medicine these days, cholesterol.
It's just, I get all warm and shivery.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly takes up a lot of time. The millions of dollars that are spent advertising cholesterol drugs on TV. You know, if only people could just send a little of that money off to, drill wells in Africa. I think it would do a whole lot more for the world than taking these drugs. But anyhow, the Organic MD, our mission here is really to give you good information. We're here to dispel a lot of the misconceptions that exist about medical treatments and medicine, misconceptions that are often fed by the huge amount of advertising and hype and promotion that's done, that really have nothing to do with real facts, real medicine, or really what's good for you. And we're here to inspire you to take some responsibility for your health and to give you some ideas about how you might do that, to make better choices in your life, things that will lead to better health, more longevity, and maybe a little more fun, a little more happiness, a little more humor in your life.
Always good.
It's always good. So I chose.
I have no argument with you on that. So
this is in our second installment here. I'm jumping right into cholesterol because it is one of those areas that just isn't really handled very well in medicine. I went to medical school at University of Cincinnati, and when I was there, that was one of the centers that was studying cholesterol. We had a lot of really great research that was going on at the time, trying to look at what the risks were from having an elevated cholesterol, what the risks were to your health. And so we had a lab, one of the earlier labs in the country, that could actually measure all of the things that are now measured, the high density lipoproteins and the low density and very low density lipoproteins and all of this.
And what are you talking about exactly?
Okay, we're talking, thank you. Bring me back.
Lipo, what?
Yeah, no, we're talking
liposuction.
We're talking about fat, okay? We're talking about the fats in your diet and what it does to the fats in your blood. We're talking about cholesterol, the bogeyman, the thing that is going to kill us all. Oh my goodness, your cholesterol's elevated and you're going to die if you don't do something about it. There are doctors out there who think that, the drugs that are used to lower your cholesterol are called statins. And there are doctors out there who think that, boy, statins should be put in the water supply. They are just so good for you, so good for your health that, we should just be giving them to everybody. And in fact, the recommended dose, forget the recommended dose. If you take 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 times the recommended dose, it's even better for you. It actually decreases.
Statin, what do you mean? Like, give an example. Like, lovastatin, is that?
Lovastatin, which brand name is Lipitor, somatostatin. There are a lot of, as a class, they're called statins, but we'll kind of use the generic one, Lipitor. I mean, that's one of the more common ones, one of the earlier ones. So all of you out there on Lipitor, this is for you. So Lipitor is a drug that will indeed lower your cholesterol. And really the question becomes, so what? There was data, this gets back now to the science. We'll talk a little about the science. Back in the 70s, if you had a cholesterol of 300, if you even had a doctor who was ordering that, your doctor would have said, you're in good shape. Cholesterol 300, no problem. Well, along came a study that looked at a lot of people, and what they found is that if people had a cholesterol of 300, they had a tiny bit more risk for heart disease, having atherosclerotic heart disease, heart attack, or stroke, than if you had a cholesterol of 200. So there were a number of these studies. They looked at veterans. They looked in these large populations of people. And what they found is that they indeed could demonstrate a slightly higher risk. And the real risk that they demonstrated is about 0.4%. So 0.4% more risk of having a heart attack. And if that study had been done in 40,000 people instead of in 50,000 people, it would have been considered insignificant. So yeah, they did show a slightly increased risk of heart disease if your cholesterol was 300 rather than 200. The reason we're doing this show today is that is not the most important thing for the health of your heart. It's been really overplayed. And the reason it's been overplayed, I think, is because there is a drug that will lower your cholesterol. Now, one of the things you want to be looking at when you're looking at medical treatments, when you're looking about these kinds of drugs, is what are the outcomes? What does that really mean in terms of your health? So we lower your cholesterol we get it under 200 using one of these drugs. Are you going to live any longer? Are you going to have a happier, healthier life because you do that? And there are no studies that show that the outcome is better, that show that you're going to live longer for having taken these drugs. All the studies show is that your cholesterol will be lower. And these drugs are not benign. They're not completely safe. These drugs can damage your liver. These drugs lead to a lot of gastrointestinal problems, meaning GI upset, or you may have diarrhea, you may have indigestion, you may have gas, and that can be quite serious. I mean, there are studies that have shown that people who are put on these drugs, a lot of them wake up one day and go, wait a minute. Okay, let me get this straight. You're telling me here's a drug that I'm going to take for the rest of my life. It's making me feel bad. It's costing me a lot of money. And there's really no proof it's going to extend my life. And they toss it. About 50% of people who are put on these drugs drop them, often not even telling their doctor that they've done it. They throw them away. They quit taking them in under a year because they feel so lousy.
Because they're still eating cheeseburgers or whatever. I mean, they haven't necessarily changed their diet or.
Well, yeah. And that gets to the next part of this, thing, that medicine, unfortunately, one of the things that.
I don't mean to slag cheeseburgers, but
No. There's a way that you can make a cheeseburger that it probably isn't the most toxic thing in the world. Good beef, good cheese. No hormones, no antibiotics. But what often happens?
That's another podcast.
Yeah, that's another podcast.
That's the cooking podcast.
That's yeah. Well, we do have that the recordings from that talk I gave on fats that are on the website. The Organic MD can be found at organicmd.com. That's where you can subscribe to this podcast and hear some of the other audio files that are there. You can find us on iTunes, and you can also find us at bettereyehealth.com, where we talk about the specific things we do for eye disease. Today we're talking about cholesterol, and the whole thing with using statins to lower your cholesterol if it's elevated. Unfortunately, what happens often is that doctors take the easy road. Patients like the easy road. People like, don't worry me with changing my diet. Don't worry me with changing my lifestyle. Just give me the pill. Give me the magic bullet. You tell me it's going to make me well, fine. I'll take a pill every day, but don't make me do anything else. So, we can get a little lazy in that respect. We can get a little, we like the quick fix. Doctors like the quick fix. When I left a hospital-based practice of medicine in 1995, and I'd been doing some rather specialized high-tech medicine, interventional radiology as my board certification. And I knew I was going to be going back into a more primary care kind of arena. I was going to be dealing with people who were walking through the door with who knows what, needed to be ready to deal with what came through the door. So to get my skills back, I worked for a year for the city and county of San Francisco in the medical clinics up there. And, the clinics there had the model now that you find in most healthcare centers around the country. The doctors are employees. They are working on a time schedule. You're expected to see 3-4 patients 3 or 4 patients an hour. And, what I found when I'd walk in the room is I would be saying a little prayer. I said, please, God, show me the drug I can give this person so I can get them out of here and move on to the next person. And really, if you've got 15 minutes to see somebody, you've got to read their chart, examine them, record, make records, write prescriptions. You don't have a whole lot of time to do much of anything besides give them a drug. And so I know from my practice of medicine, the way I'm doing it now, that I don't have a person who has a problem with cholesterol, and I don't have any people on statins. That there are people who have, through giving up smoking, changing their diet, not drinking so much, reducing stress, dealing with inflammation, dealing with toxins that they have. There are often a lot of things you have to do. All of those things really make you healthier and make you feel better. So people are happy to do them once you get them started on that route. But they don't need the drugs, and their cholesterol's come down. They don't have elevated values anymore. But the other reason that I'm here to talk about cholesterol, it isn't just because there are other ways besides drugs to deal with it. The other thing I want to be talking about here really is about risk factors for heart disease. There are a lot of other tests out there that you can do that will reveal things that might show you that you're at increased risk for having a heart attack or a stroke, things that you can uncover, things that you can modify easily, things that aren't being done on a regular basis these days. Let's start with cholesterol. One of the things that's now known about cholesterol, the basic 4 things that are measured when you get a cholesterol test. When your doctor orders a cholesterol test, they're measuring total cholesterol, they're measuring high density lipoprotein. That's what's called the good cholesterol. It's abbreviated as HDL, high density lipoprotein. They're measuring the bad, the quote, bad cholesterol, low density lipoprotein, which is abbreviated LDL. And they're measuring triglycerides. Now, one of the things that's now understood is that high density lipoprotein, the good cholesterol, well, there are subtypes of that. And there's really only one good subtype 2B. So if you have an elevated or a good HDL, a good level of HDL, your doctor pats you on the back and goes, you've got a good level of HDL. You're set. You're good. Go home. Don't worry. But if you start measuring subtypes and you measure the subtypes of HDL and none of it is 2B, you're not good. It's not, you need to be measuring the subtypes. The same is true with LDL. If you have an LDL that's over 100, your doctor freaks out and they say, you've got to be on statins or you're going to die. I'm going to be standing over your bedside when you have your first heart attack telling you, I told you so if you don't start this drug. These are, I swear on my mother's grave, doctors tell this to people. Okay. They actually say this. They threaten them with, the point where I'm going to be coming around to your bedside telling you, I told you so if you don't start this drug.
But practically, I mean, I'm just curious because I imagine myself in the doctor's office trying to remember those things you just said, which is pretty technical. Mm-hmm. Like, I don't know if I could remember, wait, I need to know I'm HB1 or 2,
right.
In a sense, what's a way for us to kind of practically be able to say, doc, you've done this test. I need to know this.
Okay. Well, I realize I'm swimming upstream here. Okay. The amount of advertising that's done for these drugs, the amount that it gets drilled into you, that cholesterol, fight cholesterol, bad fats. So, and you just need to know that there's more than that basic panel and that the more than the basic panel needs to be done. So there are a number of things that are advanced markers that measure cardiovascular risk, and you need to get those measured if you're worried. If you have a family history of heart attacks, if you have, a reason to believe that you're at risk, or if you just want to really do some laboratory testing that's actually going to point the way towards wellness for you, do the things that matter. So just measuring your HDL, LDL, and total cholesterol, that's just a part of the story, and it's not the most important part. So I started to say, if you're low density lipoprotein, your LDL is greater than 100, your doctor is going to be pushing you to take statins. But if he hasn't measured your subtypes, then you don't really know what the total story is. Because if your particles of LDL, what they measured, if they actually look at the subtypes and you have tiny little particles of LDL, yeah, you're at big risk. I don't care whether it's under 100 or over 100. But if your particles of LDL, low density lipoprotein, are all big and fat and juicy, then those aren't worrisome. So you need to know the subtypes. And then there's a whole slew, and I'm just going to name them here, a whole slew of other tests that should be done at least every now and then on you. There's one that's called homocysteine. We're going to be talking more about homocysteine in a module. We're going to do a podcast we're going to do about B vitamins and methylation cofactors. There's a big word for you, methylation cofactors. But
that makes my mind hurt.
Really? Yeah, it's a good one though. But yeah. If you have a part of your chemistry that's really significant is called methylation. It's something that goes on in every cell in your body. If it's off, if it's not functioning well, then you make excess amounts of homocysteine. And that's a marker for heart disease. And that's a marker that is far more important than what your cholesterol is. But most everybody's getting a cholesterol test, and not everybody's getting a homocysteine measured. And so you're spending an inordinate amount of time getting tested for something that, even if it is off, it's only contributing a little bit to your increased risk of heart disease. And all of the things that could be increasing your risk a lot are not even getting looked at. And And you need to understand that the things I'm going to be talking about here, homocysteine is the first of several tests. These are not, alternative tests. These are not things that are marginal or alternative or out in the stratosphere kind of crazy, silly medical tests. These are things that Medicare has been paying for years. These are mainstream bread and butter medicine. It's a standard checkoff box on any lab slip you look at. It's something that your third party payer, your Medicare plan will pay for. It's something, though, that your doctor has to think of. Your doctor has to order it. You can't just walk into a lab and ask for this. One of the things that medicine does is it controls your access to drugs, it controls your access to surgery, and it controls your access to laboratory testing. And so you need to be working in collaboration with your doctor to get this testing done. And then you need to educate yourself. If these tests are off, what do you do? So I mentioned homocysteine. We're going to be talking later about what you actually do about these things if they're off. That'll be a later podcast. Right now, we're just going to be talking about the testing. We started with cholesterol. Yeah, you want to know what your cholesterol is, but it's not the final word on what your risk factors are. I talked about homocysteine. The other things that you want to be looking at are something that's called CRP, C-reactive protein. This has been on the front page of Newsweek, Time magazine. It's looking at inflammation. There was a Scientific American and a National Geographic. They had cover stories, The Fire Within. They're talking about inflammation within the body, which is really now believed to be the root cause of heart disease. You have some kind of chronic infection. You have some kind of chronic inflammation. What that does to your body ultimately results in your getting narrowing of your arteries. That's a complex cascade of things that go on there. But I'm not going to go into that whole cascade, but you want to know, do you have evidence of a lot of inflammation in your body? Are you burning up within? Do you have a fire within? The study that's now done routinely is called a high sensitivity C-reactive protein, or CRP. That's a test you want to have done every now and then. The other things that you want to be looking at, some proteins. There are proteins that can be measured in the blood that help your body deal with cholesterol. So there's something called apoprotein B and lipoprotein A. So ApoB, LPA, lipoprotein A, apoprotein B. If those things are elevated, those in themselves are markers of increased risk of heart disease. And they're things that can be independently elevated. You can have those be off, and your cholesterol can be normal. And this is the thing that is important. Those things being off is more of a risk factor to you, probably, from what the studies show, more of a risk factor than having your cholesterol off. And the statins, the drugs like Lipitor, don't touch those things. They don't change them. Really, if you wanted to take the standard cholesterol test, those three things, the total cholesterol, high-density lipoprotein, HDL, low-density lipoprotein, LDL, the one that's probably the most important there is the HDL. That's the one that you really want to get up. You get that one up through more exercise. You get that one up through eating better. You get that one up through stress reduction. You get that one up through decreasing the amount of inflammation in your body. You do not get that one up with Lipitor. You do not get that one up with the statin drugs. So the one thing that is routinely tested, that's been shown to be probably the most important test, isn't touched by these drugs that are routinely given. The other test that you want to have done, you want to be looking at your insulin level, not what your fasting blood sugars are, but actually what your insulin levels are. And you may want to, every now and then, get something called a hemoglobin A1C. Just that gives you sort of a long-term look at what your blood glucose is, because insulin is a hormone. Insulin is not just involved in regulating blood sugar, but if you're eating a diet that's high in sugars and high in simple carbohydrates, and you're pumping up your insulin levels all day, every day, week after week, month after month, year after year, insulin is a hormone that in itself, if it's elevated, is a risk factor for heart disease. So measuring an insulin level at least once is probably a good idea. You occasionally want to be looking too at what your fibrinogen is. So fibrinogen is the raw material that makes clots in your body. You poke a hole in a vessel, the fibrinogen is floating around in there, and that's what gets activated to plug up the holes. If that is elevated, though, then you're more likely to form a clot in your vessels and close off a vessel and have a heart attack or a stroke. So fibrinogen level is something that can be easily measured, and that's another risk factor. Often if that's up, it's up because you have stress and inflammation. So the dealing with a high fibrinogen level, often you have to go looking for another thing that is causing this reaction. High fibrinogen is often a reactive problem. It's not a problem in itself, but it's still something you want to be looking for because it tells you that something's wrong, and it directs you as to where you might start looking for it. So we've talked here about having your homocysteine checked. We've talked about having your cholesterol subtypes checked, the subtypes of LDL and HDL. We've talked about having an insulin level checked. We've talked about looking for the proteins, apoprotein B and lipoprotein A, having those measured periodically. We've looked at also having the fibrinogen measured. So those are some basic things that I would have checked in people, in addition to periodically following their cholesterol. And all of these things have fixes that don't involve drugs. And we're going to be talking about those in later podcasts. How do you adjust and address these problems if you find a problem? There are some safe things that can be done for all of these problems. And so I'm not proposing that you go out and get laboratory testing that's just going to give you a bunch of numbers on a piece of paper where there's, so what? There's nothing you can do for it. I'm talking here about looking for data that's going to help you become healthier. Looking for data that's going to guide you in a rational way towards what do you need to be doing, what do you need to be addressing to reduce these risk factors. Laboratory testing that doesn't lead to any kind of meaningful intervention is in itself meaningful. That's if I'm trying to decide, should I get a lab test for someone, the question I'm asking first is it going to change anything I do? It's gotta lead to an intervention that is safe and meaningful to even bother getting it in the first place. So, that's pretty much it for the testing of the lab testing to determine cardiac risk. Who should be getting this? If you're older, it probably would behoove you to at least get a baseline test. One other test that I did not talk about, but which is something that you may want to consider if you have a strong family history of heart disease, is a genetic test that looks at something called apoprotein E. Apoprotein E, can be genetically abnormal. And if it's abnormal, that's a bit of information that you might want because it tells you that, it can tell you that maybe you're the kind of person where simple dietary interventions just aren't going to change things. It may tell you that all you have to do is, do some simple dietary interventions. But it is, if your apoprotein E is off, that alone is a risk factor and something that for some people, it's something worth getting. So, but if you have a strong family history of this, or if you're simply looking for baseline information about what is your health, what are your risk factors, these are the people who want to get it. Certainly, if you've had a heart attack or you've had a stroke or you're impotent or you're having what's called claudication, you have evidence that you have poor circulation in your limbs, you walk around and you get pain in your legs, anything that's pointing to the fact that you already have vascular disease, you want to be getting this testing done because you want to be looking for what are the modifiable risk factors that you can work on to reduce your risk. There's a book out there now which is called You Can Reverse Heart Disease, and there's an earlier bunch of work that was done by Dr. Pritikin. Dr. Pritikin and the Pritikin diet plan. A lot of you listening to this may not be even old enough to remember that. But Pritikin was a physician who had, fortunately, a rather rare disease. He had a disease called familial hypercholesterolemia. And that was the disease that really alerted medicine to the dangers of cholesterol. So, your doctor is going to get freaked out if you have a cholesterol of 300. People with familial hypercholesterolemia, they may have cholesterols of 3,000 and they die young of heart disease. So Pritikin had his first heart attack, I believe he was 26. And this is all, I'm not revealing any secrets about his medical history here. He had one of the earliest angiograms that was ever done back in 1956, and it looked terrible. His arteries, the arteries in his heart looked ratty as you can imagine. They just looked terrible. It looked like he'd been eating Kentucky Fried Chicken all his life. And he was only 26 years old, and I don't think there was a male in his family that had lived past 40. He was a physician. He decided there had to be something you could do for this. And he set out trying to find a way to lower his cholesterol. And in 1956, all he had available to him were lifestyle changes, exercise, stress reduction. And doing those things, he got his cholesterol down. He died in his 60s. His cholesterol at death was about 140. It had been 3,000 when he was first diagnosed. And he put together a whole program. Now, his program involved very low-fat diets. I'm not a fan of very low-fat diets, and I'm going to be talking in later podcasts why I don't think a very low-fat diet is the way to go. But it worked for him. That's what he did. And the book that's out now, You Can Reverse Heart Disease, these are things that will make you feel good. That's what'll hook you. That's what'll keep you coming back.
I'm guessing that attitude is maybe why a doctor doesn't order those other tests, or just kind of looks at the very simple thing, figuring, well, I'm just going to keep it simple for you, in a sense.
No, that's a part of it, because some of these things that I'm talking about, I'm telling you that there are interventions, simple and safe interventions you can do. Most of the interventions that you can do, if your homocysteine is off, if your insulin is elevated, if your apoprotein B is off, or your lipoprotein A is off, or your fibrinogen is elevated, most of the things you can do to deal with those problems, they're not treated at all by drugs. There are no drugs that treat a lot of those problems. And if the only tool you know how to use is pharmacy, if that's the only thing that you know how to do, why bother looking for something for which there's no pill, for which there's no drug? So that may be a reason, but it's also I think it's just a lack of education. I think physicians are slow to change. Even with cholesterol. Back when I was in medical school and we were studying cholesterol, what we found is that there was, physicians, even with this compelling data that it was important to look at cholesterol, it was hard to get doctors to order cholesterol tests on people. And so there was a whole thing